Pele leaned in and said something to Freddie.
Don't let them change you. Keep working on what makes you different and what makes you special. It was great advice, but it caused me some problems.
But what could change Freddie Adu?
Soccer is going to explode, and it's going to be around this kid.
We were the Beatles. Everywhere we went, it was the Freddie show.
And with that came the expectation, and with that came the pressure.
New episodes of American Prodigy drop Tuesdays from Blue Wire Podcasts.
What is crack-a-lackin', Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Valley coming at you without my co-host Adam Frommel today, but we do have a loaded podcast for you nevertheless, and that's Caps Lock loaded. We are going to be rolling out our look-aheads for as many teams as we can before the start of the season. It'll probably leak into the regular season, but guests galore. They're coming, and it starts now. We're going to talk to Light Years podcast, Sam Esfandiari, today. Follow him on Twitter, at Sam Esfandiari. That's at Sam, Esfandiari. After him, we are going to have TJ McBride, fellow Blue Wire podcaster. He hosts the Rocky Mountain Hoops podcast. He's going to be coming on to talk about the Denver Nuggets. You can follow him on Twitter at TJ McBride NBA, spelled exactly as it sounds. And then we wrap up with a look at the Oklahoma City Thunder's future. Super interesting team over the offseason. I brought on Olivia Paschall from Daily Thunder. She is a senior writer there. She's also co-host of the Crossbolts podcast over there. Follow her on Twitter at Olivia Paschall. That's Panchal. I won't try to waste any more of your time. Let's get to this. Just a quick reminder, though, to rate, review, and subscribe to Hardwood Knocks wherever you're getting your podcasts. Even if you're not using iTunes, though, head over there, search us, throw us that 5-star rating, throw us a 5-star review. We are committed to continuing rolling out the content and appreciate every single rating and commenter and subscriber who downloads every episode that we get. So without further delay, let's get to talking about first the Warriors, then the Nuggets, and then the Oklahoma City Thunder. Sam, thank you so much for coming on to talk some Warriors with me today. How are you doing?
Good. I'm watching the Raiders and the Jets. My mood may change in the middle of this podcast depending how the game ends. Just giving you a heads up.
Are they still losing? I did not look at the score since I tweeted about it when they were losing.
It's 24-21 Raiders, but it looks like the Jets. Let's just say it's getting spicy that the Jets might get their first win.
You felt like it was going to come. You never want to be the team that's giving them the win, though.
Especially not when you're a team. Oh, and they just took the lead, and especially not when you're a team who's 6-5 and in the playoff hunt.
Right. I didn't know. I thought for some reason I thought you were a Niners fan, not even a Raiders fan.
I'm fluid at this point. The Raiders were the team I preferred growing up, but they've since moved.
Right.
So if they're not going to be loyal to me, I don't feel like I need to be loyal to them. You know, maybe we'll get into a little Niners, but they still have a little bit of a soft spot for me.
Warriors, though, is the team that we are going to talk about today. I guess to just start here, what were your general impressions of the offseason? Just like the Klay injury, obviously, that's just devastating. Like, that absolutely sucks. But everything else they did, like, how did you feel? You know, Wanamaker, Bazemore, they have Wiseman. Were you shocked at all that they ended up using the TPE? Do you think that Klay's injury was like the impetus behind them using that, or was that always going to be the play? Just kind of nutshelling what your impressions were.
Okay, well, we're still not over the Klay injury over here. It's just such a gut punch. To me, I think they had a realistic shot to win the title with Klay's return. I wouldn't pick him as the favorite, but Vegas had him third or fourth most of the offseason. And I just look at everything they did in context of, man, if they had Klay back, I don't know if this team can beat the Lakers, but I like their chances to be one of the best contenders to compete with them. So it's really hard to separate those two, especially when you see someone like Marc Gasol and Aaron Baines signed to other teams. I'm 100% positive Marc Gasol would have signed with the Warriors if they had Klay. There's a lot of reasons he was interested, namely the system fits his skill set better than any team in the NBA, you know, considering his passing, his defense, all the things he does. But kind of when Klay goes down, the Warriors are no longer a contender. They can be a fun team, maybe make noise in the playoffs, but, you know, they're no longer going to be chasing kind of vets who are looking to get a ring category. Right. So long story short, everything goes back to the Klay thing for me. With that said, and I guess I'm going to make this really long, they did rebound better than expected, in my opinion. They at least have an interesting team. It's Steph Curry and like 18 dudes with 7+ foot wingspans and athleticism. So while like they're flawed players, like we don't need to, or maybe we will go into it. Like Andrew Wiggins certainly hasn't lived up to the number 1 pick. Kelly Oubre, fun player, but he's not an all-star or anything like that. Like it creates it's kind of an interesting dynamic, I guess.
On the Klay injury, really quick, like I remember listening to the pod that you guys, I think you had a doctor on to talk about it.
Right.
What is like I was cutting up video for a Twitter account of his 60-point performance. It was just the anniversary of that 4 years. And I'm watching him on offense, and it feels like he should still be able to do a lot of the same things, because it's not like maybe he's not cutting as quickly, but like he's not so reliant on burst and athleticism. And so is there like more optimism that he can be something similar to the player that he was? Or is it just like, it's been the ACL and the Achilles at this point? We can't expect anything close to that when he does actually return.
My 2 thoughts are, one, I think his days of competing for all NBA defensive teams are gone. So a huge part of Klay's value is not just the shooting. Duncan Robinson is an amazing shooter. He might shoot the ball as well as Klay. But he can't guard the best wing on the other team. Like JJ Redick's an amazing shooter. He can't do that stuff. So like part of Klay's value is the fact that he's like one of the 5 or 6 best wing defenders, and he can shoot the ball like that. So that's one thing. The second thing, my bigger concern is minutes. Klay had kind of been the Iron Man of the team.
Right.
And he pretty much always led the team in minutes per game. He was never a guy who really tired out and needed rest. Steph has had his history with nagging injuries, and Draymond to a degree too. And Klay's always been the guy. It's like 35, 40 minutes. Will run a marathon in circles running off of screens and guard the opposing player's best perimeter player and be fine. Like never gets tired, none of that stuff. Now I'm wondering if he'll ever be able to play 30 minutes a game again. I think it's much more realistic that he has, let's just say, a similar impact to what he was pre-injury, but he has to be like a 20-minute per game off the bench kind of guy.
Kind of like, not the same player, but it felt like he retained a lot of his value in smaller bursts since his Achilles injury. Was Wesley Matthews is the guy that springs to mind for me.
Yeah, exactly. And Wesley Matthews played in the mid-20s minutes per game. If Klay can do what Klay is known to do for 25 minutes a game, that's great. But that's also kind of not an all-star and not like the player we thought, the player he was prior.
Right.
So it kind of recalibrates. If the Warriors are going to contend again before Steph inevitably retires with this cast, they need to find more talent, because Klay can no longer be counted on to be that second option guy.
I don't know if I would say second option guy, but can James Wiseman be that infusion of talent? I think from you and Andy on the Light Years pod, from what I gathered, like that was the pick you would have made if you were the Warriors, even with LaMelo on the board. Am I correct? Or would you have taken LaMelo?
I would not have taken LaMelo. But there were some players a little farther down I was intrigued by, but I wouldn't have taken them at 2. It was just so obvious that those Edwards, Wiseman, and LaMelo were going 1, 2, 3 that it would have almost been a waste of the number 2 to like reach for Isaac Okoro or something like that. I would have been in favor of them maybe trading down. But with that said, I'm fine with the Wiseman pick, and he's certainly intriguing. He's a mystery to me is really the best way to put it. Like, the physical skills, jump off the page, but and I've seen, open run footage and stuff like that, but it's like he played 3 games a year ago. No one's like, what can I really take from Instagram videos of his workouts? It's like, oh wow, he's really athletic. So is Jan Vesely, right? I don't know why I went there, but.
So do you think he gets a lot of rope in his rookie year with the Warriors to where they're actually going to lean on him? Or do you think if Kevon Looney's actually healthy, they seem to like Marquese Chriss there? I guess you can always go to Draymond at the 5 lineups if you want to, and maybe they sign another big at some point. Like, is Dwayne Dedmon just inevitably going to be a Warrior? So is there a chance that he's brought along more gradually, or are they really going to like try and baptize him by fire here?
So Steve Kerr has tried to temper expectations, and kind of say, like we think he has a chance to be amazing and blah blah blah, but like don't expect too much too soon. So he's trying to slow play him, and honestly, I think that's the right move. He's 19. He didn't play last year. What's the worst that could come from slow playing him? He plays out of his mind and he ramp up his minutes, right?
Right.
Like there's a real concerted effort to kind of temper expectations because they want him to be a key piece for a long period of time, not like put all the pressure of the world on him so he, busts, so to say, because everyone expects him to be David Robinson or something. And it's like very clear he's not, And so I do think there's a slow play aspect. I do agree with you. Looney is probably the guy that they would go to in key minutes versus good opponents. If he's fully healthy, there's a trust factor there.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, they do love Marquese Chriss. They think they found something with him. They think they got him at the right time. There's a lot of, Phoenix picks him in the lottery. It didn't work out. He nearly crashed out of the league. And, he ends up on the Warriors only at age 22. And they're like, he's not a lost cause. He can do some good things. I'm curious to see if he's improved on defense. I know he's working on it the whole shutdown. I don't know how that translates like individual defensive work to games. So
the two notes for me is one, it's weird about the Warriors center rotation right now, and maybe it surprised me a little bit that they didn't I'm sure Marcus was on their radar, but once it's clear you're not getting him, I thought maybe they would get someone else. They don't have any centers that have played like higher volume roles. Like even a healthy Kevon Looney has never averaged 20 minutes a game. And then with Wiseman, it feels like to me, just the way the NBA is going, that the key for him will be like the development of his shooting. Like his release point right now is high, which is good, but can he get? And I think it was Andy.
Does it go in?
Right, it doesn't go in, but can he get it off quicker too?
Right.
To where it's like Andy made this comp to Jaren Jackson Jr. and I see a lot. The way they both score within the flow inside the arc and their ball skills in space, I get it. Like Jaren Jackson Jr. has a low release, but he gets it off like so quick. And so if you can quicken that, it feels like that might be the best path if he's actually shooting. Gives you functional shooting anyway. Like that might be his like best path to being a really impactful player for this team.
I'm going to need to see his shooting against NBA defenses, but I'm not convinced he needs to speed up his shot because he's 7'1". Like he is. And he's got a 7'7" wingspan. I mean, he physically is comparable to Rudy Gobert. I don't think Rudy Gobert's issue with shooting is he can't get the, being contested at the peak of it. It's just that he can't shoot the ball, right?
Right.
So, but no one's asking him to. So I'm curious if Wiseman, how that shot comes around. For me, the swing skill with him is going to be if he can eventually switch on defense. I think it's likely he'll be a good rim protector. He has all the athleticism and length in the world. He's shown ability to, play in drop coverage and contest shots at the rim. The Warriors also probably the thing they've done best developmentally has been big men, really, defensively. They've always kind of figured out how to make guys good in a scheme and that sort of thing. So I feel pretty confident he'll develop into being a good rim protector. I'm not saying he's going to be great or anything, but a starting caliber rim protector. For me, it's if he can't switch, if he's one of those guys who just can only play in drop coverage, you run into issues where you're kind of not playing him at the end of games. And there's just, he runs into kind of the same issues like Andrew Bogut and like a lot of these centers the Warriors had over the years are like, they're very useful, but like in specific matchups, you're pulling them off of the court.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to Andrew Wiggins, who in my notes you said seems like alarmingly important to this team now, even more so than he was before. Like what are realistic expectations for him? Because it's not even just a matter of like, okay, he can fit on offense and we'll deal with his defensive problems. Now that you don't have Klay, like he's like, and Kelly Oubre's there as well, but like Kelly Oubre's not really that great a defender either. It just seems like Andrew Wiggins is all of a sudden mission critical to what they do defensively, which is just terrifying to me.
The idea of them as defenders is better than the actuality at this point. He was the player. I mean, I keep going back to the Klay thing, but like I was excited to see him play with Steph and Klay because I don't think he'll ever get a better role than that in the NBA. Like in terms of covering up some of his deficiencies as a player and maybe the potential to maximize what he does do well. Mm-hmm. So losing Klay hurts. I actually am not as concerned about his defense as I am about his offense. He played really well defensively for the Warriors last year, really small sample, but the combination of Draymond and the coaching staff kind of on him got him to defend with consistency in a way that, we didn't see very often in Minnesota. It's not like he couldn't defend in Minnesota. The issue was always kind of like taking possessions off, checking out of games, that sort of thing. But like in terms of when he felt engaged and wanting to defend, he was, again, not saying amazing, but like above average. He knew how to at least use his athleticism, length, and stuff to make things difficult. So all the Warriors have been talking about is how they need to be a top 10 defense.
Wow.
It's putting a lot of pressure on Draymond. But their entire philosophy is basically if we can defend and force turnovers and get out and run, we can probably be a playoff team if we can do those two things. The half court's going to be a work in progress because there's no one who can shoot the ball with any sort of consistency outside of Steph Curry.
Right.
So their big thing is in some ways it feels like a Don Nelson team where it's like we're going to use our athleticism and wingspan to try to cause havoc and get out and run and kind of punt the fact that, it's not 2018 where they can do like a bazillion different creative things in the half court because they have all the talent in the world.
Do you like Wiggins' fit with this team better than Oubre's, who I think overall, I don't feel like he's not as strong as Wiggins, especially those swole pictures I guess we're getting on Twitter lately, but his length, and I don't think he's a good defender, but he's more disruptive with his length.
Yeah.
And he shot better small sample for Wiggins, but 31 and didn't play barely
right.
With Steph, 31.7% on catch and shoot threes. Kelly Oubre Jr. was closer to 35%. Both of those are like horrific numbers relative to catch and shoot threes, and maybe their shot quality goes up. But I'm just wondering, of the two, like who are you just higher on fit wise for this roster?
I go back and forth on this one. I'm kind of they're kind of opposites in the sense of one's an extreme extrovert. Like Kelly Oubre is already a fan favorite because he just cannot stop saying the perfect things that fans want to hear in front of the camera at all times. He's very outgoing and constantly talking about how hard they're going to play and all that sort of stuff. So fans love him. Andrew Wiggins is just an introverted guy. Comes across really nice, but if he didn't have to do an interview, he never would. Is the impression I get. And then as players, Steve Kerr did mention he thinks he's going to use Kelly Oubre on ball defensively more. So there's this idea that Kelly Oubre is very aggressive. He's high energy, high motor, but maybe can get lost if you're asking him to do too much. So it's a better situation if you're just I just want you to guard, whatever the point guard. Just follow him around, just mirror him. Don't even think about switching and doing, dealing with cutters on the weak side or stuff like that, which takes a lot more awareness. It's a little more complicated. So I think there's going to be some of that with Oubre, whereas I think they're really trying to challenge Wiggins to take on a more cerebral role, and we'll see if that works. But given between the two, it does make sense.
In Wiggins' defense, and I don't ever defend Andrew Wiggins, just so you know, but having a consistent coach and culture at this point, even if you don't necessarily like Steve Kerr, they churned through approaches and coaches and directions and players during his time in Minnesota. Right. And maybe just being with the Warriors now, where it's the same environment for, another season, after having a partial season there, maybe that ends up helping, particularly, like you said, if he was that much better on defense for them at the tail end of the year.
Yeah, and I mean, that's, for me, everything with the Warriors is a gamble on their culture. Andrew Wiggins' play through the first 5 years of his NBA career is what it is. Mostly disappointing, flashes of, some real talent, but like more often than not, you kind of see a player who looks like they're going through the motions and not very interested. The Warriors seem to believe that in their culture, with their coaching staff, with their leadership, he's never played with someone like Steph Curry or Draymond Green. Maybe Jimmy Butler and Draymond have some similarities, but in terms of their mentality. But yeah, I mean, there's a belief that they can get the most out of him. I could see it. I just don't know what most out of him means.
You mentioned Draymond. Is it like, if you had to, it feels like there might be more pressure. I know people probably gravitate towards Steph because they're like, oh, can he uplift his team and yada, yada, yada. Like, that's like a discourse I just try not to even acknowledge. But it feels like after the year that Draymond had, he might have more pressure on him than anyone else, like, on the roster right now, because it feels like we're all of a sudden wondering, was last year really his I just don't give a fuck like gap year, or is it a sign of actual regression? And do you have like a take one way or the other on that?
Again, the Warriors would tell you all that time off did wonder for those players because of how many games they played over the previous 5 years and the toll that takes on every human not named LeBron James. So, who apparently, general biology doesn't apply to him, but whatever.
When you can spend 7 figures a year on preserving your body, I think that probably helps a little bit too.
It does. But yeah, so I don't know. I want to see him is basically what it comes down to for me. Like he did have a few throwback games last year, like Christmas Day versus the Rockets is probably the only one anyone outside of like the Bay Area would remember.
That was exact when I said like with the exception of a few, that was like the exact game that sprang to my mind.
I think that was also he scored like 22 or 25 points. I don't think he got over 20 in a single game the rest of the season. Like in general, he's not a scorer, but yeah, he did look like old like peak Draymond Green in that specific game. So it is in there, but I'm curious what this layoff did for him because he was the one who was the most banged up. Like, okay, I take it back. Technically, Klay was the most banged up with the torn ACL, but Draymond over the previous few years because he played a big man role. I mean, it wasn't just one thing. It was lower back, shoulder, knees, all of them just ailing. He would say a lot of that led to a shot falling off, but you could just see it when he played too. A lot of like, I'm not going to physically apply myself until the end of the game because I don't want to beat up my back any more than I have all year. So I'm just curious what he looks like. He barely played last year, and he hasn't really played in 9 months at this point. Right. So we should see something that, kind of looks like the player that, the player that got famous and made the All-Star team, but we'll see.
I think what he probably has going for him is, I don't know why he feels like he's older than he is, but he's 30. Like, that's not ancient. And then the other thing was, and, I don't know how much stock people place in this, but in his 2,500 plus possession sample size, the Warriors were like a league average defense with him on the court still last year. And their transition defense was fantastic. And so if that's like a banged up, disengaged Draymond, like you have to think that, I don't actually know what the defensive ceiling of this team is given the rest of the personnel, but you have to at least, I would think, feel semi-confident that as long as he's healthy, he should be able to have like a pretty huge impact on their defensive performance specifically.
Yeah, actually, you bring up an interesting point. I made this on my podcast, but the defense, once they got Wiggins, again, we're talking 12 to 15 games. When there was Wiggins and Draymond on the floor at the same time, it was really good. Now, I highly doubt Portland, Miami, the Lakers, the teams that are playing were giving you their A-plus effort at that point in the season. Like they knew the Warriors was an easy win at that point. But they looked night and day different. He definitely did not like D'Angelo Russell because of defense. And a lot of that just frustrated Draymond. If you go back and watch a January game against the Nuggets, it was on TNT. The Warriors were about to win that game, and then the Nuggets came back late to win it. You could see Draymond just flipping out at D'Lo because, like, it was the fourth quarter. The Warriors had the lead, and all they needed to do was get a few stops, and he was playing with pickup basketball, lackadaisical energy on defense, and Draymond just letting him hear it like, dude, I need you to play defense for 2 minutes. What's wrong with you? Like that sort of like 15 billion profanity, whatever in the middle there. So that's kind of why there's belief that Wiggins could work, because at least he'll follow someone like Draymond's lead and play defense, or at least that's the hope. And yeah, to your point, even though he had a terrible season, they were competent on defense with him on the floor, and that's with largely G Leaguers around him.
Right.
And they were disgusting when he was off the floor. So, I mean, he still is one of the best defensive anchors in the NBA, even if it doesn't show up in the highlight plays the way it used to when he was younger.
Yeah, I didn't even think to look at that. And it was a sub 200 possession sample size, but Draymond and Wiggins on the court, Warriors defensive rating in the 82nd percentile, which is ridiculously good. And the defensive rebounding during those minutes was surprisingly incredible. So I guess that's something to look toward. Who's like looking at last year's roster, who's like the non-marquee holdover, like, not Draymond, not Andrew Wiggins, that you're just most interested in seeing with this team, or think that can actually make an impact to what's a better team? Because I think it's fun to talk about, Eric Paschall or Marquis Chris, like, oh, they showed some stuff, but like the Warriors were just terrible last year. And so how does that translate to a team that has tempered expectations now, but actual expectations?
I guess I'm most curious for Jordan Poole.
Okay.
Jordan Poole came on at the end of last year. Again, players playing well on, garbage teams at the end of a season is never really like the you always want to be careful with that sort of stuff, right?
Right.
But I feel like because he played a lot better when they moved him to point guard. And if he can play well as kind of a heat check guy, because that's what he is, off the bench behind Steph, that could really help this team, because this team is lacking shooting and kind of shot creation. And he's the most likely source of it off of the bench. Brad Wanamaker is a solid veteran. That's not his game, right?
Right.
Kent Bazemore, another very solid veteran, not the guy who's going to, pull up off a high pick and roll from 27 feet. Not his game. So I think he's the most interesting because he can really help them and kind of solidify their bench units. When I'm looking at this Warriors team right now, I'm like, this team will probably play winning basketball when Steph's on the floor, and when he's off the floor, they will just be bleeding leads. It'll be like one of those like 2017 MVP Westbrook type of seasons where it's like, well, when he was on the floor, anytime he sat, the like point plus minus differential was like 20 the other direction,
right?
That type of thing. So if someone like Jordan Poole, and I'm not saying he will, if he can be kind of that like 6-man type, that can go a long way in making the team better. So I'm most curious to see him.
He did. I looked up, like, in anticipation of this pod, he shot over 60% on off the dribble 2-point jumpers after the All-Star break. So sub 10 game sample size, but like,
yes,
to have that level of shot creation there, I think I would agree with you where, like, I don't know who else is it aside from, in theory, Wiggins and Stephen Curry, who can generate their own shots on this team.
Like Eric Paschall also was probably the talk of the season for them last year. He had a really good rookie year. He made the rookie first team. And he's kind of a combo forward who wants to just like ISO in the mid post and get to the rim. And so he can do some of that stuff, but like, it's not the same as having a guard who can come off the high pick and roll behind the 3-point line. Right. So, I also kind of think Paschall will probably be the same player he was last year. So it's not so much taking a step as much as his role is he's going to do the same thing just in 20 minutes a game instead of 35.
He seems like the player that might, I guess it would be him or Jordan Poole, but that might be most important during the however many minutes per game this ends up being, where you don't have Steph or Dre on the court. Like, just knowing that you can have like Paschall in the post is just a huge option, because there's just so little shot creation on this team outside of their main guys.
And that's what it's going to be. So that's why I was kind of curious about Jordan Poole, because Paschall will be able to do some. He already showed he could do that stuff last year, and he'll continue to do it this year. But if they could get a guard, kind of the player who sets up the play, to be able to put pressure on our defense, that'll go a long way. Because we know Steph will do that when he's on the floor, but when Steph's off the floor, I don't know what's going to happen, really.
Is there any chance, because like Minnesota tried this at the beginning of last season, which feels like a decade ago, that they try to put him in that role where you're seeing him with a lot of minutes independent of Steph and Draymond, and maybe he's running. Maybe, I don't know how much of this will be part of the Warriors' identity now, but if you're just having Andrew Wiggins run pick and rolls, because it seemed to work out for a time in Minnesota, at least at the beginning of last year.
Can you say the second part one more time?
Is there like a chance where maybe, and I don't know how much of this will be part of the Warriors' identity, but is there a chance we see maybe Wiggins in those no Draymond, no Curry minutes, again, however short they are?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Either Wiggins or Oubre, they are both 20-point-per-game scorers. Whether they should be is a different question, but like they're guys who can generate some offense, right?
Right.
I would. Kerr has said he's going to start both of them. I just don't think the team has enough talent for him to like be able to be super cute by putting one of his players off the bench as like a sixth man. But he's planning to start both of them. But I would be shocked if there wasn't a stagger to have at least one of them with the bench unit, be it Wiggins or Oubre. He's gonna experiment with both. I don't know which way is the better way to go, to be honest.
So, and this is probably too early. Like I think even 5 games into the season for this specific team, it's too early to ask this question. But how do you sort of see the rotation shaking out? If we assume, I'm assuming the starting 5 is going to be Oubre, Wiggins, Steph, Draymond, and then big to be named soon, I guess. Like
yeah. I mean, and Steve Kerr confirmed that he's going to at minimum try those 4. And then if he finds out, like, man, it makes more sense to have Oubre come off the bench as like a super jolt of energy for rotations. Maybe he makes that change, but he's planning to start with, the 4 you mentioned plus center to be named later. They're going to start camp tomorrow, so I think we'll get a better idea then. I actually think they'll probably start Marquese Chris.
Okay.
It appears that. I don't know. The Warriors had 2 players test positive for COVID. Pretty reasonable chance that Wiseman's one of them because he's the only player who hasn't had media availability in the first week.
Yeah, it gets pretty evident who these players probably are when they're.
We will know by tomorrow, Monday. Even with that said, I think Kerr really wants to protect him. Like the last thing he wants to do is have him opening night, like checking Kevin Durant and then Giannis the following game and then like Anthony Davis. Like that's just setting the kid up for a little failure, right?
Right.
Particularly considering he didn't get summer league and this kind of, I didn't really think about this till a week ago. He was drafted the 18th of November. The season starts the 22nd of December. Like, and they haven't even had an official team practice yet. Like it's unfair to expect rookies to.
And his last actual game was over a year ago. It was in November.
Yeah, exactly. If the Warriors were not interested in making the playoffs and like wanted to rack up losses, they would probably start Wiseman and be like developmental year, right? But that's not what they're thinking as long as Steph is healthy. So I think they'll probably start with Marquese Chris. Looney will probably be the guy who closes, and Wiseman will get minutes in between. It'll be like the standard weird thing the Warriors have done in the past where like they play 3 or 4 centers 15-ish minutes a game. And I think on the wings, obviously Bazemore is going to get a lot of minutes just because he's a reliable vet. You know what you're getting from him. You know he'll defend and force turnovers and kind of play within the flow of the offense. And Wanamaker, kind of a similar concept with the guard position. Paschall will play behind Draymond. And then it's going to be interesting to see, will Jordan Poole establish himself as like a 6-man scorer that they need? Will it be Damian Lee? The coaching staff loves Damian Lee. He was, again, fine as a kind of a backup guard with energy and everything. Like they were asking him to be like the second leading scorer by middle of the season, which is probably too much for Damian Lee. But if you're talking about the 9th man, it's not so bad, right?
Right.
So
do you get,
I think it's
when you're looking at like how the top of that rotation is going to shake out, like, yes, there's Steph, so technically spacing doesn't matter, but are you like at all concerned to the point where like maybe the Warriors should try playing, not to start, but like, Steph and Brad Wanamaker in the backcourt feels like it could make a ton of sense for some stretches because Wanamaker shot almost 50% on catch and shoot threes last year in Boston.
He might be the second best shooter on the team,
which is a terrifying notion.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of speaks to, I was playing with the numbers. If Steph takes 12 threes a game and hits over 40%, which he probably will in both cases, and the rest of the team shoots 33%, and they take, let's just say 35 a game, which is league average.
Mm-hmm.
They come out to league average 3-point percentage, even with Steph hitting an absurd volume of threes. So that kind of speaks to, I think they need someone on this team has to have that, that year where they shoot 38% from three, the 33, 34% shooter who just gets really hot. Like maybe it's Kelly Oubre, right?
Yeah, I guess it could be Ken Bazemore. Yeah, he's been all over the place too.
One of those dudes that maybe it's Eric Paschall. They're banking on, they have a bunch of hyper athletic guys who profile as low 30% 3-point shooters. They need one of them to, not be Klay Thompson, because that just won't happen.
Right.
But like be someone who can catch and shoots at a pretty consistent clip.
So let's say they're in a game that matters. It's crunch time. Is the lineup in those minutes the same as what you're anticipating it to be as the starting five, where it's basically those four players plus Chris in the middle, or do you see them playing with that a little bit more?
I think they'll play with it. I could see, because of Oubre and Wiggins' size, they could put Paschall in there and go with the small ball lineup. You'd literally have Steph and four dudes who are 6'7" with 7+ wingspans. So, I mean, they've liked to do it in the past. The talent level is slightly different than, Andre Iguodala, Klay Thompson, and Kevin Durant. But
yeah, it's just a little different.
But conceptually, they could do that, particularly if you have a bunch of size on the wings. You can get away with maybe a little less size inside. They could also go with Looney. They know Looney's the best defensive big they have outside of Draymond. So they could go that route. I think they'll play with it, to be honest. They could even go hyper small. They could put Oubre at the 4, and they could put Wanamaker in there and go with like Steph, Wanamaker, Wiggins, Oubre, Draymond. I think I will see them close with Draymond at center a lot, because they can be extremely athletic and fast.
Yeah, I mean, he barely played there last year. Obviously, the circumstances didn't call for it, but that still seems like their pathway to like having, insofar as they can have a cheat code lineup, like the Draymond at the 5 still feels like their path there.
It's going to be a pain for opposing teams, because the pace when they go Draymond at 5 is fastest in the NBA, and they should be able to take advantage of the athleticism. It doesn't change the shooting flaws they have and like some of the other flaws they'll probably have on defense, because even if those guys are hyper athletic, they're not Andre Iguodala or Klay Thompson. But what I was gonna throw in there is, the other reason they didn't use Draymond at 5 much last year was wear and tear. It's like, look, we're not making the playoffs. Do we really need to destroy his body in a last year or two?
And like they've always seemed like a little reticent, even during like their dynasty heyday, to like put him there for too much during the regular season.
I think Steve Kerr
hates versatility. No, sorry.
He loves versatility. I think he's always found it. He believes it's more effective in small doses to catch teams off guard. Mm-hmm. Like he would be someone who took real, like, I don't want to say joy, but like validation out of how the Rockets just got utterly destroyed by the Lakers by going all in on small ball. He's like, he would be someone who says, hey, PJ's excellent as a small ball center, but if you're going to try to use him for 48 minutes, you're going to wear him down, and someone like Anthony Davis is going to figure that out. So I think what happened to the Rockets validates Kerr's perspective, which is we want to use this for quick punches, and maybe we extend it in specific matchups. But in general, I don't want Draymond guarding 5s for 40 minutes a game, because he'll just start becoming less effective. His body will break down.
Is there like a lineup that, like a quirkier lineup that you're hoping they test out at some point this season? Maybe it's one that like Kerr wouldn't prefer to trot out, just based off their personnel. It feels like they could, I don't know if it's necessarily a good thing, but like so much uncertainty on the roster. It feels like you could mix and match a bunch of different combinations just to throw it out there and be like, hey, does this work?
I do think the small ball lineup with Wiggins and Oubre and maybe Paschall or maybe Bazemore could be really fun. Okay. I keep thinking, first off, they're leaning into the We Believe thing with the Oakland City Knights jerseys, which are basically a knockoff of the ones that like the Baron Davis We Believe teams wore. They're leaning into it because like this team has a better chance of mirroring that team than mirroring the title teams of the past, right?
Right.
On the to tie into that, those teams were best known for going small and really causing havoc and being athletic in transition. So just any combination that can kind of get them really running and, just causing a bunch of turnovers could be a lot of fun to watch. Because, like I said, if they get stuck playing half-court basketball with Steph being trapped and like no one guarding Wiggins and Draymond behind the three-point line and that stuff, it could get really ugly really quick.
If they're like in a spot where maybe they're playing better than expected, like close to the trade deadline, or like they're very firmly entrenched in the the top 5 race in the West, could you see them making a significant move midseason? Because we know they're sitting on the assets, the Minnesota pick, they have James Wiseman still, or is that something, especially following Klay's injury, that if it actually happens is just far more likely to happen after this year when they can sort of reevaluate where they're headed after actually getting this full season to look at?
So 2 thoughts there. I think they're oddly kind of like the Boston Celtics at this point with their like ability to compete for the playoffs, but also having like the other team's probable high lottery picks so they can play both ends of the spectrum. I'm thinking about like the Celtics teams with like Isaiah Thomas and Avery Bradley, where you're like, they're not a contender, but they're certainly good enough to make the playoffs.
Right. And like, you don't,
but like those Nets picks were really what the fan base was excited about. And it, turned out right because Jason Tatum is very good. So I don't think they're interested in moving the Wolves pick unless it nets a young star. The Klay injury makes it even tougher for them to move it because I don't think there's belief that Klay will be an all-star when he comes back. I think there's hope that he'll be a good player at best. So they really can't move that Wolves pick unless they're netting kind of an impact guy who's younger. Like they're not going to move. Let's put it this way. They're not going to move the I said Nets pick. Wow, I've totally messed up on that. They're not moving the Wolves pick for like Marcus Smart or Robert Covington, 2 excellent players who objectively help you win games. But like you only trade like a top 10 pick for one of those guys if you really think that's going to put you over the top. And is Robert Covington going to make them win a title? No. He's going to help them win a couple more games, right?
Right.
So
it depends on, I guess, how you value the pick, but like I don't think the Timberwolves are going to be very good this year, so I don't know why you would there has to be other moving pieces, but I don't know why you would trade it for anything short of a star. I'm just curious if and I'm not saying these guys would be gettable, but like if Bradley Beal or James Harden, let's say he promises to show up to practice with them.
Those are stars, though. So,
but you said young stars, so I'm like Bradley Beal's still young, I guess. So that's an easier call. But like James Harden is 31, 32.
31, yeah.
So like, is that a move you still make? I guess you kind of have to, but I'm like you mentioned it with the Klay thing. Are they like more concerned now with sort of bridging it internally from this era to the next one because of that Klay Thompson injury, where it's like we actually need this infusion of youth to play the long games? We're just not completely barren.
Yeah, so I guess I should amend that. If you could get James Harden, you do it because he's still a top 5 player, and you should be able to build a title contender with Steph and James Harden. If you can't, that's kind of on you. It's not on like their talent. Like it's a pretty damn good starting point. But my point is on the Wolves pick, superstar or young star who may become a superstar are probably the only type of moves they're going to engage that pick with. If Klay was back, they may have been more interested in trying to acquire someone like a Marcus Smart, who's like the perfect role player for a contender, who's going to, like in the same capacity that like Andre Iguodala was, right? Yeah.
Marcus Smart also shot above 40% on pull-up threes last year, so he might have been one of the better shooters on this team looking at the roster. It's not. I didn't even write down a question about Steph because I feel like if he's healthy, like he should just be this known quantity. He's a top 5, top 3 player easily, and yet he still sort of has like this baggage of, well, can he really uplift a team that's suboptimal around him? And I think I'm not curious to see if he can, because I think all the evidence with the way he's uplifted stars like drastically just proves that he will. But is it wrong to be like, I don't know the way to phrase it, like morbidly curious about Steph like now getting another chance to run with a suboptimal supporting cast that he was supposed to have last year, just to not to just quiet doubters, but just to really see it, because he's always been, I don't know if marginalized is the right word, but there's always been like other shadows next to him because they've had all these stars.
His game's so different. Like he can be the best player on the floor
without
while not touching the ball. Yeah,
Right.
And it's like I mean, I go back to the 2015 finals are probably the best example of his game was so ahead of its time that they didn't know how to parse the finals MVP. And if you like go back and look at it, like, okay, if you want to say LeBron was the finals MVP, I can accept that because that's just a different argument. But to give it to Iguodala, who basically just hit open shots that were generated because Steph was triple teamed. Like go rewatch the footage. Andre Iguodala has 5 seconds to kind of, set up his shot in the corner, and he hit him, and he was amazing on defense, of course, too. But like, that was all because of Steph, right? Like Steph was drawing the double teams. The Cavs were kind of the first team to really blitz him and kind of get the ball out of his hands and dare other people. So there's always been kind of a misunderstanding especially because like when he gets hot, it's one of the best shows you can see. So like him affecting the game by not making shots is a very indirect thing.
Right.
To your broader point, I just want to see him stay healthy.
That's
like
fair.
my concerns with him are not that he can uplift this roster. Like if you remember the 2012-13 Warriors upset Denver and pushed the Spurs to 6 games.
Right.
Everyone was like, oh, Jared Jack's so good for them. Jared Jack leaves, never heard from again. You go rewatch it, all of a sudden you start realizing it's like, well, yes, Jared Jack can hit a pull-up jumper when everyone's paying attention to Steph. But like put him on a team where he has to kind of run the show, it's not quite the same thing. So I do think Steph is 100% capable. I'm just curious. He's 32. He's just, at this point, there's no other way to parse it other than say like he picks up a lot of nagging injuries.
And I don't know if this is encouraging or discouraging, but at least it doesn't feel like it seemed like way back when the ankles could be like this chronic issue, but now he's like reached the Anthony Davis level where it's like, oh, it's a thigh, it's his right hand. Yeah, it could be his ankle, it's his MCL. So the fact that they're like not necessarily directly connected, although maybe some of them are, like, is that like more encouraging, or is it just like it doesn't even matter because he's been like so banged up in all these different years?
I don't think it matters. It's just like if you want to criticize Steph relative to the other top 5 or 6 players in the NBA, the criticism is his durability. It just is. Like, I think he's a better player than James Harden, in my opinion. But James Harden is a tank. He plays through everything. You can pencil him in for 75 games or he'll sit a couple games here or there with something, but like he's going to play the full season.
Right.
He's going to play heavy minutes. You don't have to worry about it. With Steph, he gets knocked and something's bruised up, and there is a durability concern with him that's unique to him that I don't even think applies to Kawhi. Kawhi has all the load management stuff, and like it's worrisome for a different reason. But when he's on the floor, he's still a very physically imposing player because of his size and his strength and everything. And that's just a different thing with Steph. He can get beat up. He can get he can lose. He can get hurt a lot easier than other guys, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. So looking at everything, and like you can assume whatever you want. If you think they're going to lose games to injury, if you think there's a major move, like what's a realistic win total and Western Conference finish? And if you haven't given like thought to what the like wins are in a 72 game season, I have a conversion thing set up really quickly for that if you want to do it over 82 games.
Well, so Vegas, the books I saw last had them at 36.5, which is a little above 500, and had them at the 8 seed. I don't think that's unfair. I think if they get good health, they could push to 4. I think if they get bad health, they could also fall out of the playoffs.
Right.
There's very little margin for error with this team. If you could tell me Steph's going to play 70 out of 72 teams, I like their chances to push into that 4 to 6 range. If you tell me he's going to miss 10 games, now I'm like, they're kind of in a dogfight for the 8 seed. Like that's kind of like, And then if you tell me he's going to miss 20 games, I'm like, yeah, let's just make it 50 and gun for 2 top 10 picks, that type of thing. So it really comes down to his durability for me. I do think they're going to start slow because Steph is in amazing shape right now. He's been working, he's ready to go. He hasn't played with any of these guys, and they're kind of putting a new roster together. He played 1 game with Wiggins. He's played 0 games with Oubre. He played a game last time Bazemore was his teammate was 2 presidential cycles ago. There's just a lot of moving pieces. So I would not be surprised if they got destroyed on Christmas by the Bucks, who will be a machine. And we know who the Bucks are, right? There's very okay, they have to integrate Drew Holiday. That's one player they're integrating to a team who knows how to play with each other, right?
Right. And
so I would not be surprised if the Warriors started slow, and then if they stay healthy, 15 games, maybe they start 6-8, and then they go on a run where they win 12 out of 15 or something like that. That's kind of how I see the season breaking out for them in a pot. If we're being optimistic,
I think getting into the top 4 conversation is just a matter of when I look at them, I guess maybe I'm so high on Steph and kind of confident that Draymond will come back. It feels like they could be a legitimate top 4 seed where that's not their ceiling. I could map out scenarios of anything in the West right now because I don't think the Lakers or Clippers are going to care about what happens in the regular season. Really,
sure.
It's I could map out a path for the Warriors getting 2, but it doesn't feel unrealistic to if you said Steph is healthy and whatever constitutes that is it playing 67 of 72, whatever. If he's healthy and Draymond is close to Draymond, it feels like
and he's healthy too,
right? It feels like top 4 is a realistic projection, but they have a higher range of outcomes because their floor is technically lower than a lot of these other really good teams.
Yeah, I mean, the reality of the matter is you're not really concerned that Nikola Jokic is going to get hurt. You're not concerned that James Harden's going to get hurt. He might not be in Houston next week, but you're not concerned that Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert won't get hurt. And those teams, we know how good they are. There's a baseline that we know they can achieve, and they've proven a level of durability year in, year out that it's fair to question with the Warriors at this point. It's fair. You can easily say, hey man, they just went to 5 straight finals, give them a year off. You could also say they played a lot of basketball and maybe we're reaching the point in their career where expecting them to play 90% of games with a certain level of performance is just unrealistic. So I'm with you. They could go either. It feels like their range is broader, even though, Utah, for example, is a Rudy Gobert or Donovan Mitchell injury away from falling off too.
Yeah, so it's just a matter of every team or most teams are that one injury away from plummeting, but the Warriors scenario, worst case scenario, feels more likely. Yeah, we've
just seen that the Warriors' key players actually go through that last year and the previous couple of years, so it's easier to wrap our heads around.
Especially because it happened where it wasn't just one of them, where it was Steph and KD at once, and then it's KD and Klay. You had superstars to spare, but you ended up needing having those 4 superstars.
Right.
Just to put a bow on this, is there anything that we didn't touch upon that you wanted to talk about? Something that's just undercovered about this team heading into the season?
Not really. I just feel I just want to see them healthy. That's really all I'm at with them. I think they will be a playoff team if they stay healthy. And I think they can be actually a very fun team who people will really start paying attention to midseason when they start making a little noise or something. So it really all comes down to health for them. Obviously I have my own personal biases here, but I would like to see Steph kind of put together one more full year of health and just kind of remind everyone of how good he is and kind of how fun it is to have him in the mix in this league. He's one of the 3 or 4 most exciting players to watch, and it's kind of a bummer when he's out injured or we don't get to see him play. The same way it's a bummer if, we didn't get to see KD last year, or LeBron missed most of the year before, or insert any of those guys who kind of make you stop the channel anytime you're flipping through.
There is, if he's healthy, and narrative is a big part of this, whether anyone likes it or not,
Sure.
There's like a stage set for him to get his third MVP award if he stays healthy, because people are going to love the narrative of him uplifting this cast and not having KD's not there this time and Klay's injured. So like if he has like that full healthy season, that's a conversation where if you told me Steph played in 67 games this year, or 65,
right.
I would say he finishes top 3 in MVP without question.
I agree with you. I think that Vegas has Luka as the most likely. And I mean, I would also say it feels like Luka's probably going to win the MVP this year. He's just like next guy up.
No voter fatigue because Giannis is like, even if he's there, like no one's going to vote for him again.
Like I can't imagine what Giannis can do this year to get a third straight one, like average 40. Like
LeBron will be fuming if Giannis gets a third straight MVP.
Yeah, LeBron would have a case just based off of the legacy aspect, but I kind of agree with you. I don't think we're going to see the Lakers try until like post Valentine's Day.
Yeah, so. It seems like Davis would be the more, if there's going to be one of the two to win it, it'd be Davis just because maybe he'll care or play more during the regular season at this point.
Yeah, so I mean, you do bring up a good point. I do think Steph has a good shot at winning the MVP if he just stays healthy.
This blew up in my face. He was my last season MVP pick. So it was before he got injured. I thought that was going to be that type of season. So I'm with you though, but just having him healthy Draymond, and then just Kelly Oubre Jr.'s existence, like that's a recipe for watchability. So I'm hoping this team stays healthy as well as an impartial observer. Thank you so much for giving me an hour of your time, Sam. This was really great. I don't know if anyone's listening to this and doesn't listen to the Light Years pod or follow Sam on Twitter. You should remedy that immediately. He's at SamEsfandiari, Sam Esfandiari. Again, thank you so much, and I'm sure down the line I will be bothering you again.
Yeah, anytime. I mean, hopefully you are, because that means that they've stayed healthy and they're relevant. I feel like you're probably not going to get me on to discuss how Jordan Poole's leading them from the 15th seed to the 14th seed if everything goes wrong.
Well, at that point, we'll just bring you on to talk about your 2021 draft coverage, because you'll be another expert in that draft class.
Dude, it's a fun class. I'm actually it is a fun class. I don't know too much about the prospects at this point. Like they've really only played like 2 to 3 games. So it's a lot of like projecting conjecture at this point, but it's like they all look like kids who grew up watching Steph Curry, James Harden, and LeBron James, because they're all kind of a hybrid of those players. Okay. So they're all 6'6", 6'7", can do multiple things, and are all constantly trying to chuck it from 30 feet also. So it's just interesting because it's like the first generation of guys who I think grew up on like modern basketball, like what we've gotten used to over the last 6 years. So they're developing those skill sets, ability to make a three, ability to run a pick and roll as a bigger wing, those type of things that like maybe players 15 years ago were not doing, when they were younger.
I only ever get shin deep in draft coverage, and I certainly I can't watch live college basketball, and it definitely won't be this time of year. But like I told you, Light Years, while it was painful for you, became like a very good place to like stay in tune with the NBA draft throughout the season. And all I know at this point is everyone thinks that like Cade Cunningham is going to be like the super real deal in out of this draft class. Probably too ambitious with the Wolves pick, because if you're getting Cade Cunningham, it's the Wolves kept it. But I think the Wolves are going to be in that conversation for like a bottom 5 to 7 team. And so that's a really valuable pick for Golden State, assuming they keep it.
And this is one of those drafts where like someone said there's 10 guys in this draft who would go number 1 over Anthony Edwards. That feels like, hyperbole, but it might not be off. It's one of those drafts where like the guys who are going 6, 7, 8 are still interesting, and like we know you're not going to get 10 all-stars in the first 10 picks. Like that's not how it works. But there are guys who are going to be picked there who have like tools and look just interesting. Let's put it that way, as opposed to like in other drafts where you're drafting like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope number 8, and you're like, I hope the 3D wing,
Yeah. But again, this was great. Thank you so much, Sam, and I'll be talking to you soon.
Absolutely. Talk to you later, Dan.